Good evening and welcome to my second part of The First Sex. My name is Tamara Von Forslun and I'm the matriarch of the clan of Boskebner. In the time falling bodies take to light, historian William Owen Thompson points out that human evolution occurred in three critical stages. One, hominization, in which our primate bodies became human, not only walking upright and freeing the hands, but specifically in our sexual characteristics and functions. Secondly, synchronization or symbolization, in which we began using speech, marking time, painting and sculpting images. And third, agriculturalization, in which we domesticated seeds and began control of food production. And as Thompson writes, all three stages were initiated and developed by the human female. The symbol making and agricultural stages have been studied, and the originating role of women in these stages is known. It is sexual hominization which as yet has barely been explored. Why? Why indeed? Because sexual hominization is almost exclusively the story of the human female, the mechanics and anatomy of male sexuality, after all, haven't changed greatly since the primates made love. This, despite the known fact that among contemporary and historic hunting and gathering people, as among our remote hunting and gathering ancestors, 75% to 80% of the group's subsistence comes from the women's food fathering activities. This despite the known fact that the oldest tools used by contemporary hunter and gatherers and the oldest, most primal tools ever found in ancient sites are women's digging sticks. This despite worldwide legends that cite women as the first users and domesticators of fire. This despite the known fact that women were the first potters, the first weavers, the first textile dryers and hide tanners, the first to gather and study medicinal plants. For example, the first doctors, and so on and on. Observing the linguistic interplay between mothers and infants, mothers and children, and among work groups of women, it is easy to speculate on the female contribution to the origin and elaboration of language. That the first time measurements ever made, the first formal calendars, were women's lunar markings on painted pebbles and carved sticks is also known. And it is thoroughly known that only God image ever painted on rock, carved in stone or sculptured in clay from the Upper Paleolithic to the Middle Neolithic, and that is roughly 30,000 years, was in fact the image of a human female. The oldest statue even found is called the Venus of Willendorf from 28,000 BC. In 1948, The Gates of the Horn was published in Britain, and in 1963 it was published in America retitled Religious Conceptions of the Stone Age. In this pioneering work, archaeological and scholar G. Rachel Levy showed the unbroken continuity of religious images and ideas descending from the Cro-Magnon peoples of Upper Paleolithic period in Ice Age Europe, through the Mesolithic and Neolithic developments in the Near East, and down to our own historical time. As Levi wrote, these early people are lost to us in the mists of time, but their primal visions, images, and gestalts of human experience on this planet still resonate in our psyches, as well as in our historic religious ontological symbols. These early Stone Age people bequeathed to all humanity a foundation of ideas upon which the mind could raise its structures. And what were these primal human images and ideas? Well, the case as was the female womb, the mother of a pregnant earth, the magical fertile female as the mother of all animals, the Venus of La Salle, standing with the horn of the moon upraised in her hand, and the cave rebirth. Levi shows the continuity of these images and symbols through the late Neolithic Near Eastern rites and mythologies, and their endurance 30,000 later in modern religions. In Christianity, for example, with its central image of the birth of the sacred child in a cave-like shelter, surrounded by magical animals, and especially in Catholicism, the icon of the great mother who stands on the horned crescent moon and awaits the rebirth of the world. The evidence leaves no doubt that these images were at the origins of what we call human psychological and spiritual expression. Levi's book is a masterpiece, and it received great praise upon both its British and American publications and has since been virtually bypassed and ignored by the anthropological, archaeological, academic establishments. Why? Because her evidence is irrefutable. It shows with clarity and in the solidity of stone and bone that the first 30,000 years of Homo sapiens' existence was dominated by a celebration of the female processes, of the mysteries of menstruation, pregnancy, and childbirth, of the analogous abundance of the earth, and of the seasonal movement of animals and the cycles of time in the great round of the mother. The Gate of the Horn is as close as we can come to reading the sacred book of our earthly human ancestors. And it confirms that too many people do not want to know the first God was female. Since Levi wrote, the tendency has been to relegate these old Stone Age and Neolithic images to the psychological realm. They've become archetypes of the unconscious and so forth. Whilst anthropological writers proper, both academic and popular, continue to explain physical, real human development solely in terms of the experience of the male body in hunting, aggression, and toolmaking. Thus, the female images, which are there and cannot be denied, are widespread reduced to the subjective, the mythic realms, and thus the first 30,000 years of our human history is denied to us, relegated to a mind trip or psychological software. And less through hypocrisy and racism, we dismiss these practices as merely barbaric or ancient. We must recall that clitoridectomies were performed in the last century on young girls and women in nearly every country in the world. Up to 80,000 girls and women undergo this barbaric procedure to stop them from having a focus on anything else except to be receptible for childbearing. And no pleasure at all. This surgery, very popular in the 19th century Victorians, was inflicted on any female considered to be oversexed, or as a punishment for masturbation, or as a cure for madness. These determinations were all made by male relatives, male physicians, and male clerics, and the women involved had no legal say in the matter. These are extreme examples of the repression and mutilation of female sexuality, also sanctioned, however remotely and dishonestly, by something called God. All the other repressions and mutilations of the body, of the mind, of the soul, of our experienced female selves are so well known and documented that they need no remuneration at this point. We can make our own lists. The point is this: wherever repression of female sexuality and of the female sex exists, and at the present writing, this is everywhere on earth, we find the same underlying assumptions. These are ontological assumptions and assumptions made at the very root of things about the nature of life itself. They are one, that the earth and the world was created by a male deity or God. Two, that existing world orders or cultures were made by and for men with God's sanction. And third, that females are an auxiliary sex who exist to serve and populate these male world orders. Fourth, that autonomous female sexuality poses a wild and lethal threat to these male world orders, and therefore must be controlled and repressed. And finally, five, that God's existence as a male sanctions this repression. The perfect circulatory or tautology of these assumptions only helps to bind them more securely around the human psyche. That they are as erroneous as they are universal seems to pose no problem to their upholders. After all, wherever we go on earth, every intact installation and institution, religious, legal, government, economic, military, communications, and customs, is built on the solid slab of these assumptions. And that's a pretty entrenched error. In the post-World War II United States, as well as in Europe and most of the world generally, we've gone through a scheduling period in which some of these assumptions have been loosened up and even been made to crumble under questioning. But now the backlash is upon us. Today, spokespeople for various fundamentalist religious beliefs are modern media and use modern media to broadcast a very old idea that female sexuality, For example, feminist demands for abortion, contraception, reproductive autonomy, childcare, equal pay, psychological integrity, etc., constitutes a threat to our civilization. And this amounts to blasphemy against God. Halls of Babylon, Darwin's theory of evolution, and the menace of world communism all somehow get subliminally mixed up in this feminist threat for some very good historic and psychological reasons, which we will explore at a later date. For now, it is enough to say that God and civilization are loaded concepts, loaded with dynamite, that can always be brought in to end an argument that cannot otherwise be refuted. Or, for those who do not lean too heavily on God or who major in civilization, you can always quote an anthropologist or open your heart to the goddess as she answers all women's prayers. For just as established religions assume the maleness of God, and just as Freud and psychoanalysts assume the maleness of libido, so have the social sciences, and in particular anthropology, assumed the generic maleness of human evolution that feature almost exclusively. The adventures and inventions of man, the hunter, man, the toolmaker, man, the territorial marker, and so forth. Woman is not comprehended as an evolutionary or revolutionizing creature. She is treated rather as an auxiliary to a male-dominated evolutionary process. She mothers him, she mates him, she cooks for his dinner, and she follows him around picking up the loose rocks. He evolves, she follows. He evolutionizes and she adjusts. If the book jackets do not give us pictures of female Homo sapiens being draped by their or dragged by their hair through 2 to 3 million years of He-Man evolution, we are left to assume that this was the situation. Even today, with our relative sophistication of 2023, we are frequently whistled at by magazine headlines that promise breathless articles announcing the discovery of a new spot, a G-spot, an X-spot, located somewhere within the vagina. With all of these new spots exists an old wistful desire to deny the existence of the clitoris as a trigger organ of female orgasm. Why? There is a generalized traditional fear of female sexuality. Further, there is discomfort with similarity with the common origin of the female clitoris and the male penis. Women are used to hearing the clitoris described as an undeveloped penis, but men are not used to thinking of the penis as an overdeveloped clitoris. Finally, the most seriously, there is a profound psychological and institutional reluctance to face the repercussions of the fact that the female clitoris is the only organ in the human body whose purpose is exclusively that of erotic stimulation, and release. So what does this mean? It means that for the human female, among all Earth's life forms, sexuality and reproduction are not inseparable. It is the male penis, carrier of both semen and sexual response, that is simultaneously procreative and erotic. If we wanted to reduce one of the sexes to a purely reproductive function on the basis of its anatomy, we don't. It would be the male sex that qualified for such a reduction, not the female, not the human female. But these are only biological facts. These are only biological realities. As we know, facts and realities can be and are systematically ignored in the service of established ideologies. Throughout the world today, virtually all religions, cultural, economic, and political institutions stand where they were built centuries ago on the solid foundation of an erroneous concept, a concept that assumes the psychic passivity, the creative interiority, and the sexual secondariness of women. This enshrined concept states that men exist to create the human world, while women exist to reproduce humans. Period. If we agree that data exists, not solely biological, but archaeological, mythological, anthropological, and historical dates, which refutes the universality of this erroneous concept, we are told to shut up because something called God supports the erroneous concept, and that's all that matters, and that's the final word. Sounds terrible, but it's the truth. I hope you enjoyed part 2. Next week, we get into part 3. Have a great time, and I look forward to seeing you then for part 3 of the first sex. Blessed be.